Grace Lancaster had stopped believing in wishes 3 years ago, but something about the fountain's weathered stone and the way the afternoon light caught the water made her reach for her purse anyway. She pulled out a quarter, turning the coin over in her palm as tourists bustled around her in the plaza. The fountain stood in the heart of downtown Seattle, tucked between glass office buildings and upscale restaurants, a relic from another era that the city had preserved. Grace closed her eyes, feeling foolish but desperate enough not to care. "I wish for something real," she whispered, and tossed the coin into the clear water. The moment her quarter hit the surface, she heard another splash directly behind her. Grace turned, startled, and found herself looking up at a man in an expensive charcoal suit. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and striking hazel eyes that seemed to see straight through her. He held his hand suspended over the fountain, having just released his own coin. "Sorry," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough. "Didn't mean to crowd your wish." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It's a public fountain." "True." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Though I have to admit I might have stolen your wish." "You can't steal wishes," Grace said, but she was smiling despite herself. "Can I?" He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "What if I wished for exactly what you wished for?" "That would be quite a coincidence, considering you have no idea what I wished for. Maybe I'm very good at guessing." He extended his hand. "Vincent Turner." Grace shook it, noting the firm grip and the calluses that seemed out of place on someone wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Grace Lancaster." "Grace." He said her name like he was tasting it. "Are you from Seattle, born and raised? You, transplant." "Moved here about 5 years ago for work." Vincent glanced at his watch, a sleek piece that Grace recognized as a Patek Philippe because her ex-boyfriend had obsessed over luxury watches. "This is going to sound forward, but would you have coffee with me? There's a place around the corner." Grace knew she should say no. She had a manuscript due to her editor in 2 weeks, and she'd barely written half of it. Her career as a romance novelist was finally gaining traction after years of struggle, and she couldn't afford distractions. But something about Vincent Turner made her want to be reckless. "Sure," she heard herself say. The coffee shop was a small, independent place with exposed brick walls and the rich smell of fresh espresso. Vincent ordered a black coffee, and Grace got her usual vanilla latte. They settled into a corner table, and Grace found herself studying him more closely. He had the kind of face that suggested he didn't smile often, but when he did, it was genuine. "So what do you do, Grace Lancaster?" Vincent asked, wrapping his hands around his cup. "I'm a writer." "Romance novels, specifically?" His eyebrows rose. "Really? Have I read anything of yours, maybe? I write under G.M. Lancaster. My latest book, The Space Between Us, hit the USA Today list last month, no kidding." Vincent looked impressed. "That's incredible." "What made you want to write romance?" Grace considered the question. Most people asked it with a hint of condescension, as if romance wasn't real literature. But Vincent seemed genuinely curious. "I like stories about connection, about people finding each other despite the odds. The world can be pretty harsh. I think we all need to believe in happy endings." "Do you? Believe in them, I mean." "I have to for my work, but personally," Grace stirred her latte, "I'm still waiting for evidence." Vincent's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Bad breakup. 3 years ago. He left me for someone who had their life together, someone who didn't spend their days making up stories." Grace wasn't sure why she was telling this stranger something so personal. "Said I was too much of a dreamer." "Sounds like an idiot," Vincent said flatly. Grace laughed, surprised. "You don't even know me." I know that anyone who can't see the value in what you do isn't worth your time. He leaned forward. Romance writers create hope. That's not nothing, Grace, that's everything. Something in her chest tightened. What about you? What do you do? Vincent hesitated, and Grace saw something like reluctance cross his face. I'm in real estate development. Interesting. Are you working on anything in Seattle? A few projects. Mostly commercial properties, some residential. He changed the subject smoothly. Do you always make wishes at fountains? Only when I'm stuck. I've been trying to write this scene for days and nothing feels right. My heroine is supposed to meet the love of her life, but every version I write feels forced. Grace shook her head. I came to the fountain hoping for inspiration. Did it work? Grace met his eyes and felt that flutter again. Maybe. They talked for 2 hours. Vincent was easy to talk to, asking thoughtful questions and actually listening to her answers. He told her about growing up in Boston, about his father who had been a carpenter and taught him the value of building things that lasted. He didn't mention his mother, and Grace didn't push. When she mentioned her own family, her parents who owned a small bookstore in Ballard, Vincent's interest seemed genuine. They must be proud of you, he said. They are, though my mom keeps asking when I'm going to write literary fiction. Grace grinned. She thinks romance is beneath my talents. Parents always think they know what's best for us. There was weight in those words, a story Vincent wasn't telling. Grace wanted to know more, wanted to understand the shadows that occasionally crossed his face. But they'd just met, and she respected boundaries. When Vincent finally checked his watch again, he grimaced. I have a meeting in 20 minutes, but I really don't want this to end. Grace's heart did a small flip. Me neither. Can I see you again? Dinner, maybe? I'd like that. They exchanged numbers, and Vincent insisted on walking her to her car. As they stepped outside, Seattle's typical drizzle had started, misting everything with fine rain. Vincent immediately shrugged out of his suit jacket and held it over Grace's head. You'll get soaked, she protested. I'll dry. Come on. They hurried down the street, laughing as the drizzle turned into proper rain. Grace's car was parked 2 blocks away, and by the time they reached it, they were both breathless. Vincent handed her his jacket, now thoroughly damp. Keep it, he said when she tried to return it. You can give it back at dinner. When? Tomorrow, unless that's too soon. Tomorrow's perfect. Vincent smiled, that full, genuine smile that made him look younger. I'll text you. He hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her cheek, brief and warm. Thank you for coffee, Grace. Grace drove home in a daze, Vincent's jacket draped across the passenger seat, smelling like cedar and something crisp she couldn't identify. When she got to her apartment, a small 1-bedroom in Capitol Hill with barely enough space for her desk and overflowing bookshelves, she found herself opening her laptop and staring at the problematic scene. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The words poured out, the scene finally clicking into place. Her heroine met her hero at a fountain, and everything that happened after felt inevitable and right. Grace wrote until midnight, the most productive session she'd had in weeks. When she finally climbed into bed, her phone buzzed with a text. Can't stop thinking about you. Sleep well, Grace. She fell asleep smiling. Vincent picked her up the next evening in a sleek black Audi. He traded the suit for dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look more green than brown. Grace had agonized over her outfit, finally settling on a burgundy dress that her best friend Mara insisted made her look like a goddess. You look beautiful, Vincent said when she opened the door, and the way he said it made her believe him. He took her to a restaurant on the waterfront, upscale but not pretentious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Grace felt like she'd stepped into one of her own novels. Over perfectly cooked salmon and roasted vegetables, they talked about everything. Vincent asked about her writing process, and Grace found herself describing the way stories unfolded in her mind, characters taking on lives of their own. He told her about his love of architecture, how buildings could tell stories just like books did. "There's this project I've been working on," Vincent said, his face animated in a way she hadn't seen before. "An old warehouse down by the waterfront. Most developers would tear it down, but I want to preserve the bones of it, turn it into mixed-use space. Shops on the ground floor, apartments above, but keeping the original brick and steel." "That sounds amazing," Grace said. "Why that building specifically?" "My father worked there, actually. Back when it was still operational, he helped build some of the internal structure." Vincent's expression softened. "He died when I was 22. Heart attack on a job site. I always thought if I could save that building, it would be like saving a piece of him." Grace reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm sorry about your father. Thank you." Vincent's fingers interlaced with hers. "He would have liked you. He always said the most important thing in life was finding someone who understood your heart." Wise man, he was. Vincent's grip tightened slightly. "Grace, I need to tell you something." Her stomach tensed. Here it came, the revelation that would ruin everything. He was married. He was moving away. He was actually a serial killer. "I wasn't completely honest yesterday," Vincent continued. "About what I do, I am in real estate development, but it's a bit more than that. I own Turner Development Corporation. We're one of the largest commercial developers on the West Coast." Grace blinked. "How large?" "Very large. I'm what people would call a billionaire, though I hate that word. It reduces everything to money." "Oh." Grace processed this information. "Is that why you hesitated to tell me? People treat me differently when they know. They either want something from me, or they assume I'm some kind of monster because I have money. But you, yesterday at the fountain, you just saw me. I didn't want to lose that." Grace studied his face, seeing the vulnerability there. "I'm still seeing you, Vincent. You're the same person you were 5 minutes ago. Am I?" "Yes, although now I understand the watch," Vincent laughed, tension breaking. "Fair enough. Can I ask you something?" Grace said. "At the fountain, you said you might have wished for the same thing I did. What did you actually wish for?" Vincent's eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "I wished for you." Grace's breath caught. "You didn't even know me." "I know. But I looked at you, standing there with your eyes closed, so hopeful and beautiful, and I thought, I wish I could know what she's wishing for. I wish I could be what she needs." He ran his thumb across her knuckles. "Then you turned around and I thought maybe wishes do come true." "That's probably the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me," Grace whispered. "And I write romance for a living. Maybe you should put it in a book. Maybe I will." After dinner, Vincent suggested a walk along the waterfront. The Seattle summer evening was mild, the sky finally dark, city lights reflecting off the water. They walked close together, Vincent's arm around her shoulders. "Can I ask what you wished for?" Vincent said. "At the fountain," Grace leaned into him. "Something real. I've spent so much time writing about love, creating it for my characters, but my own life has felt empty. I wanted to know if what I write about actually exists outside the page. And now I'm starting to think it might." Vincent stopped walking and turned to face her. The lights from the pier cast shadows across his face, but his eyes were clear. "Grace, I know this is fast. We barely know each other, but I feel something here, and I think you do too." "I do," Grace admitted. "It scares me a little. It scares me too. I've spent the last 5 years building my company, and I haven't had room for much else. I've dated, but nothing ever felt right. No one ever understood why I care so much about preserving old buildings, or why I still keep my father's toolbox in my office." He cupped her face in his hands. "Then I saw you at that fountain and everything shifted." Grace kissed him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it, just rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Vincent made a soft sound of surprise, then pulled her closer, kissing her back with a tenderness that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, Grace was breathless. "That was real," she said. "Very real," Vincent agreed, his voice rough. They spent the next 3 weeks in a whirlwind. Vincent took her to construction sites and showed her the buildings he was working on, explaining his vision with passion that made her fall harder. Grace let him read her manuscript in progress, terrified of his reaction. But he'd stayed up all night to finish it and called her at 6 in the morning to tell her it was brilliant. He met her parents at the bookstore, charming her skeptical mother by asking intelligent questions about first editions, and promising her father he'd read Middlemarch if it would prove he took literature seriously. Grace met Vincent's small circle of friends, business associates who clearly respected him, and his assistant Deanne, a sharp woman in her 50s who pulled Grace aside and said, "I've worked for Vincent for 8 years. I've never seen him like this. Don't break his heart." "I won't," Grace promised, meaning it. But as the weeks turned into months, Grace became aware of complications she hadn't anticipated. Vincent's wealth created a buffer between him and the world that she didn't quite understand. He thought nothing of flying them to San Francisco for dinner, or buying out an entire movie theater so they could watch a film in private. When Grace protested the extravagance, Vincent looked confused. "I just want to spend time with you without interruptions," he said. "I know, but Vincent, this isn't normal life. This isn't how most people live." "Is that a problem?" Grace struggled to articulate what bothered her. "I don't want to lose touch with reality. My writing comes from real experiences, real emotions. If I'm living in this bubble of private jets and exclusive restaurants, how do I stay grounded?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "You're right. I've been so caught up in showing you what I can give you, I forgot to ask what you actually want." "I want you," Grace said simply. "Not your money or your lifestyle, just you." After that conversation, things shifted. They spent more time at Grace's tiny apartment, cooking meals together in her cramped kitchen. Vincent taught her how to fix a leaky faucet, using skills his father had taught him. Grace introduced him to her favorite pizza place, a hole in the wall with questionable decor but amazing food. They went to movies in regular theaters and walked through Pike Place Market on Saturday mornings like every other couple. Grace fell more in love with him every day. She loved how he listened when she talked about her work, offering insights that actually helped her writing. She loved how he played old jazz records on Sunday mornings and made breakfast, humming off-key to the music. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. But she also saw the pressure he was under. Vincent worked constantly, his phone always ringing with crises that needed his attention. His company was expanding into Portland and Vancouver, and the stress of managing multiple projects was taking a toll. Grace would wake in the middle of the night to find him gone, working in her living room with his laptop and blueprints spread across her coffee table. "You need to rest," she told him one night after finding him still awake at 3 in the morning. "Can't. We have a city council meeting tomorrow about the warehouse project. The preservation board is fighting us on the residential component. Vincent, you're going to burn out." He rubbed his eyes. "I know, but this project matters. If I can prove that preservation and development can work together, it changes everything. It becomes a model for other cities, other developers. It saves buildings like the one my father worked on." Grace sat beside him on the couch. "I understand that, But what good is changing the world if you're too exhausted to enjoy it? Vincent pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention. The warehouse project became all-consuming for Vincent. Grace attended the city council meetings with him, watched him present his vision with passion and precision. The opposition was fierce, a coalition of preservationists who didn't trust developers and developers who thought preservation was impractical. Vincent was caught in the middle, trying to bridge two worlds that didn't want to be bridged. Grace saw a different side of him during those meetings. He was commanding, authoritative, but never cruel. When opponents challenged him, he listened and adjusted his plans to address their concerns. When his own team pushed for shortcuts that would compromise the building's integrity, he held firm. "This matters," he told them. "We do this right, or we don't do it at all." The vote came down to a single council member, a woman named Patricia Torres, who remained undecided until the final moment. Grace held her breath as Patricia stood to speak. "I've spent the last 3 months reviewing this project," Patricia said. "I've listened to concerns from both sides, and I have to say, I'm impressed by Mr. Turner's commitment to preservation while acknowledging the city's need for development. His proposal isn't perfect, but it's a genuine attempt at compromise. I vote yes." The room erupted. Vincent's team cheered, and Grace felt tears of relief streaming down her face. When Vincent found her in the crowd, he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around. "We did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it," Grace corrected. "I just watched." "No." Vincent set her down but kept his hands on her waist. "You helped me see what mattered. You reminded me why I was fighting. Grace Lancaster, I love you." It was the first time he'd said it. Grace felt her heart expand, felt everything she'd been holding back rush to the surface. "I love you too. So much." Vincent kissed her in the middle of the crowded council chambers, and Grace didn't care who was watching. This was real. This was everything she'd wished for at that fountain 6 months ago. The aftermath of the vote brought new challenges. Vincent's company was flooded with requests from other cities wanting similar projects. He was traveling constantly, and Grace felt his absence like a physical ache. Her own career was flourishing too. Her latest book had hit the New York Times list, and her publisher wanted 2 more books in the next 18 months. They were both successful, both busy, and the time they spent together became precious and rare. Grace started to worry about the sustainability of their relationship. How long could they keep this up? Constantly missing each other, always saying goodbye. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in November. Vincent was supposed to come over for dinner, but he called at the last minute to cancel. An emergency at the Vancouver site required his immediate attention. "I'm sorry," he said, and Grace could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "I'll make it up to you." "When?" Grace heard the sharpness in her own voice and hated it. "Vincent, I barely see you anymore." "When you are here, you're on your phone or thinking about work. I feel like I'm losing you." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "That's not fair. You know how important this work is to me. And my work is important to me, but I make time for us. I prioritize you." "So you're saying I don't?" Now Vincent sounded angry. "Grace, I'm building something here. I'm trying to change an entire industry. That takes sacrifice." "I know that, but what about us? Are we just another thing you sacrifice for your work?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Grace felt tears burning her eyes. "Because from where I'm standing, it feels like I'm always waiting for you to have time for me." "I don't know what you want me to say," Vincent said, his voice tight. "This is who I am. My work, it's part of me. I thought you understood that." "I do understand. But I need you to understand that I can't be with someone who's never actually here." Another long silence. Are you breaking up with me? The question hit Grace like a punch. Was she? Is that what she wanted? I don't know, she whispered. I just know that this isn't working. Fine. Vincent's voice had gone cold, the warmth she loved completely absent. I have to go. I'll call you when I get back from Vancouver. He hung up before she could respond. Grace spent the next 3 days in misery, her phone silent, her apartment feeling emptier than it ever had. She tried to write but couldn't focus. Every romance scene she attempted rang hollow. How could she write about love when her own relationship was falling apart? Mara came over on Thursday with ice cream and wine. Talk to me, she demanded. Grace told her everything. About the fight, about the distance that had been growing between them, about her fear that loving Vincent meant always coming second to his work. Do you love him? Mara asked when she was done. Yes, completely. Does he love you? I think so, but maybe love isn't enough. Mara gave her a long look. Grace, you write romance novels. You better than anyone should know that love is messy and complicated. It's not all grand gestures and perfect moments. It's also fights and sacrifices and figuring out how two different people build a life together. I know that intellectually, Grace said, but living it is harder than writing it. Everything worth having is hard. Mara squeezed her hand. The question is, are you willing to fight for this? Because if you are, you need to talk to him. Really talk, not just throw accusations at each other. Grace knew Mara was right, but she didn't know how to bridge the gap between them, didn't know if Vincent even wanted to try. She got her answer on Friday evening. Grace was in her pajamas, eating cereal for dinner and watching a mindless sitcom when her doorbell rang. She opened it to find Vincent standing there, looking worse than she'd ever seen him. His hair was disheveled, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, his usually crisp clothes rumpled. "Can I come in?" he asked. Grace stepped aside. Vincent walked to her living room and stood there, seeming unsure of what to do with his hands. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "You were right, about all of it." Grace sat on the couch, her heart pounding. "Vincent!" "No, let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I've spent the last 3 days in Vancouver, trying to fix problems that my team could have handled without me. And the whole time, all I could think about was you. About how I've taken you for granted, assumed you'd always be there waiting while I chased my ambitions." "Your ambitions matter," Grace said softly. "I never wanted you to give them up, I know, but I've been using them as an excuse. The truth is, I'm scared." Vincent sat beside her, close but not touching. "I'm scared of how much I need you. I've spent years being self-sufficient, not depending on anyone. And then you came into my life and suddenly nothing feels right when you're not there. That terrifies me." "Why?" "Because everyone I've ever loved has left. My father died. My mother remarried and moved to Europe, and we barely talk. I've built walls to protect myself, and you walked right through them like they were nothing." Vincent's voice cracked. "I don't know how to balance loving you and protecting myself." Grace felt her anger dissolve, replaced by understanding. "You don't have to protect yourself from me. I'm not going anywhere." "How can you promise that?" "Because I love you. Because I fought with you the other night instead of just walking away. If I wanted to leave, I would have already." She took his hand. "But Vincent, you have to let me in, all the way. That means trusting me enough to show me when you're struggling, asking for help instead of carrying everything alone." "I don't know how to do that." "Then we'll figure it out together." Grace squeezed his fingers. "That's what love is. It's not having all the answers, it's being willing to find them with someone else." Vincent pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I missed you so much. 3 days felt like 3 years. I missed you too." They held each other for a long time, the TV still playing in the background, the world outside fading away. When Vincent finally pulled back, his eyes were damp. "I want to make changes," he said. "Real changes. I'm going to hire another project manager to handle the day-to-day operations. I'll still oversee everything, but I need to delegate more, and I'm going to set boundaries. No work after 7 unless it's an actual emergency. Weekends are for us. You don't have to do all that immediately, Grace said. Yes, I do, because losing you isn't an option, Grace. You're more important than any building, any project. I should have told you that from the beginning. Grace kissed him, soft and lingering. I love you, and I'm sorry too. I should have talked to you about how I was feeling instead of letting it build up until I exploded. We're both learning, Vincent said. But we're learning together, right? Together, Grace agreed. The months that followed weren't perfect, but they were better. Vincent kept his promise about delegating, bringing on a talented project manager named Marcus who took over much of the day-to-day operations. It was hard for Vincent to let go of control, and Grace watched him struggle with it, but he persisted. They established routines. Sunday mornings were sacred, reserved for lazy breakfasts and reading in bed. They cooked dinner together at least 3 nights a week, experimenting with recipes and laughing at their failures. When Vincent had to travel, Grace sometimes went with him, working on her laptop in hotel rooms while he attended meetings. Her writing flourished. The understanding she'd gained about real relationships, about fighting and reconciliation and growth, deepened her stories. Her editor called her latest manuscript the best thing she'd ever written. I don't know what happened, her editor said, but you've tapped into something true here. The emotions feel so raw and real. Grace smiled, thinking of Vincent. I'm just writing what I know. Spring arrived, bringing cherry blossoms and longer days. The warehouse project was nearing completion, and Vincent invited Grace to tour the finished building before the official opening. She walked through the space with wonder, seeing how he'd preserved the industrial character while creating something beautiful and functional. This is incredible, she said, running her hand along the original exposed brick. Your father would be so proud. Vincent's expression softened. I hope so. There's something I want to show you. He led her to the top floor, to a spacious apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Sound. The space was empty except for a single piece of furniture near the windows, a restored antique desk. This apartment is mine, Vincent said. I kept it for myself instead of selling it. I thought maybe we could use it as a writing space for you. Somewhere you could work with natural light and a view. The desk was my father's. He used it to draft his building plans. Grace felt tears welling up. Vincent, this is too much. It's not enough. Grace, this whole building exists because you believed in me, because you pushed me to fight for what mattered. I want you to have a space here, a place that's yours. She walked to the windows, looking out at the city she loved, the water glittering in the afternoon sun. Behind her, she heard Vincent move, and when she turned, he was on one knee. Grace's breath caught. Grace Lancaster, Vincent said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I wished for you at a fountain almost a year ago. I didn't know what I was wishing for then, just that I needed you in my life. Now I know. You're my partner, my best friend, my home. You make me braver and better. You teach me about balance and compromise and what really matters. He held out a ring, a simple platinum band with a single perfect diamond. Will you marry me? Grace dropped to her knees in front of him, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. Vincent slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her, deep and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Grace rested her forehead against his. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, so much. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the fountain where they met. Grace wore a simple white dress, and Vincent couldn't stop smiling the entire day. Her parents cried, and even Deanne got misty-eyed. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to fight fair and love hard and always make time for Sunday morning breakfasts. For their honeymoon, Vincent surprised her with a trip to Italy. 2 weeks of exploring ancient buildings and eating incredible food and making love in sun-drenched hotel rooms. They climbed the Spanish Steps in Rome and made wishes in the Trevi Fountain, laughing about how their story started. "What did you wish for?" Grace asked, tossing in a coin. "Can't tell you or it won't come true." "Vincent Turner, we're married now, no secrets." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I wished that we get 50 more years of this, of adventures and laughter and loving you. Only 50. Okay, 100. Better." When they returned to Seattle, they moved into the apartment in Vincent's building. Grace set up her writing space at her father's desk, and Vincent converted one of the spare rooms into a home office. They hosted dinner parties for their friends and family, filling the space with warmth and life. Grace's career continued to flourish. She wrote a novel loosely based on their love story, changing enough details to maintain their privacy, but capturing the essence of what they'd found together. It became her biggest bestseller, optioned for a movie within weeks of publication. Vincent's company expanded, but he maintained his boundaries, never letting work consume him the way it had before. He and Marcus made a great team, and the warehouse project won several architecture awards. More importantly, it sparked a movement. Other developers started reaching out, wanting to learn how to balance preservation with progress. 2 years after their wedding, Grace found out she was pregnant. They stood in the bathroom of their apartment, staring at the positive test, both too stunned to speak. "We're having a baby," Grace finally said. Vincent whooped, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around before carefully setting her down. "Sorry, is that okay? Should I not spin you?" "I think I'm fine," Grace laughed. "It's barely the size of a poppy seed right now, our poppy seed." Vincent placed his hand on her still flat stomach, his expression filled with wonder. "I can't believe it." The pregnancy was mostly smooth, though Grace spent the first trimester exhausted and nauseous. Vincent took such good care of her that she sometimes felt smothered, but she appreciated the intention behind it. He read every pregnancy book he could find and asked their doctor so many questions that even Grace felt embarrassed. "I just want to make sure you're both safe," he said when she teased him about it. Their daughter was born on a rainy October morning after 14 hours of labor that left Grace exhausted but euphoric. Vincent cried when he held her for the first time, this tiny perfect person they'd created together. "She has your eyes," he whispered. "She has your nose," Grace countered. They named her Rose after Vincent's father, Robert. Rose Turner came home to an apartment filled with love and books and the sound of her parents laughing. Grace learned to write in short bursts between feedings and diaper changes. Vincent rearranged his schedule so he could be home more, refusing to miss the important moments. When Rose was 6 months old, Grace found Vincent sitting in the nursery at 2 in the morning, holding their sleeping daughter and watching the rain stream down the windows. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly, joining him. "I keep thinking about that day at the fountain," Vincent said. "How different my life would be if I hadn't stopped there, if I hadn't seen you, hadn't made that wish." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you believe in fate?" "I didn't used to. I thought everything happened because of hard work and determination. But now," he looked down at Rose, then at Grace, "now I think maybe some things are meant to be. Maybe the universe puts people in the right place at the right time, and it's up to them to be brave enough to take the chance." "You were brave," Grace said. "You talked to a stranger at a fountain. You asked me to coffee. You let me see past all your walls. We were both brave." Rose stirred in his arms, making the little squeaking sound she always made before waking. Vincent rocked her gently and she settled back into sleep. "I wished for something real," Grace whispered, remembering that day almost 3 years ago. "And I got everything I never knew I needed." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "Same here." They sat together in the darkness, rain falling outside, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them. In the morning, there would be work and responsibilities and all the chaos that came with having a baby. But in this moment, everything was perfect. Grace thought about all the wishes she'd made over the years, all the hope she'd poured into fountains and falling stars and birthday candles. None of those wishes had come true the way she'd imagined. But this, what she had now with Vincent and Rose, was better than anything she could have dreamed up. Outside, the rain slowed and stopped. The clouds parted, revealing a sliver of moon. In the apartment, a family slept, warm and safe and loved. And somewhere in downtown Seattle, a fountain waited for the next person brave enough to make a wish. The years continued to unfold with their share of joy and challenges. Rose grew into a curious, spirited child who loved books as much as her mother and buildings as much as her father. On her 3rd birthday, Vincent took both his girls to the fountain where it all began. "This is where I met Mama," he told Rose, lifting her up so she could see the water. "Make wish?" Rose asked, her vocabulary still simple but her meaning clear. "Absolutely." Vincent handed her a penny. "Close your eyes and wish for something good." Rose squeezed her eyes shut, her little face serious with concentration. She threw the penny with all her might, and it landed with a satisfying splash. Grace and Vincent each threw in coins too, and when Rose asked what they wished for, Vincent knelt to her level. "I wish that you grow up brave and kind, just like your mama." "What Mama wish?" Grace smiled at both of them, her heart so full it almost hurt. "I wished for more days just like this one." Rose seemed satisfied with that answer. She wriggled out of Vincent's arms and ran to chase the pigeons gathering near the fountain. Vincent stood and wrapped his arm around Grace's waist. "No regrets?" he asked. Grace looked at their daughter, fearless and joyful, then at the man beside her, steady and true. She thought about the life they'd built, the fights they'd weathered, the love that had grown deeper with each passing day. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They spent the afternoon in the plaza, Rose delighting in every bird and flower and splash of water. Strangers passed by, some stopping at the fountain to make their own wishes. Grace wondered about their stories, what they hoped for, what dreams they were brave enough to speak aloud. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Vincent lifted Rose onto his shoulders. She shrieked with laughter, her hands tangled in his hair. Grace walked beside them, her hand in Vincent's free one, and felt a sense of completion she'd never experienced before. This was what she'd wished for at the fountain that day 3 years ago. Not just romance or passion, though she had both of those in abundance, but something real. Something that lasted beyond the first rush of attraction, beyond the honeymoon phase. A partnership built on trust and compromise and showing up for each other even when it was hard. Vincent caught her looking at him and smiled, that smile that still made her pulse quicken. "What are you thinking about? Happy endings," Grace said, "and how they're really just happy beginnings." Very philosophical for a Sunday afternoon. "I'm a writer. It's my job to be philosophical." Rose tugged on Vincent's hair, demanding his attention, and he laughingly complied. They walked home through the streets of Seattle as evening fell. A family of 3, their future stretching out before them, full of possibility and promise. That night, after Rose was asleep and they were curled up together on the couch, Vincent pulled out his phone and showed Grace something he'd been working on. It was a children's book, beautifully illustrated, about a fountain that made wishes come true for people brave enough to believe. "I wrote it for Rose," he said, "so she'll always know the story of how her parents found each other." Grace read through it, tears streaming down her face by the final page. The story was simple but perfect, capturing the magic of that day without being overly sentimental. "Vincent, this is beautiful. When did you do this?" "I've been working on it for months, commissioned an illustrator and everything." He looked almost shy. "Do you think she'll like it?" "She'll love it. I love it." Grace kissed him softly. "You continue to surprise me." "Good. I never want to stop surprising you." They made love that night with the tenderness that came from years of knowing each other's bodies, each other's hearts. Afterward, Grace lay in Vincent's arms and listened to his heartbeat, steady and strong. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" "For stopping at that fountain, for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me." Vincent's arms tightened around her. "Grace, loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done. Everything else, the company, the projects, the accolades, none of it means anything without you." "I feel the same way." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, the city lights filtering through the windows, their daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall. Two people who had wished for something real and found it in each other. Two people who had built a love that would last a lifetime and beyond. And in downtown Seattle, the fountain continued its eternal flow, waiting for the next lonely soul to stop and dare to hope. Because magic exists in the world, not in the water or the coins, but in the courage it takes to believe that love is possible, that happy endings are real, that sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, wishes really do come true. Grace had learned that lesson, and she carried it with her through every page she wrote, every story she told. Love wasn't easy. It required work and patience and a willingness to be vulnerable. But it was worth it, always worth it. Years later, when Rose was old enough to understand, Grace would take her to the fountain and tell her the whole story. How a lonely writer made a wish, and a brilliant man made one too. How their wishes intertwined, creating something neither of them had imagined but both of them needed. And Rose, brave and beautiful like her mother, wise and determined like her father, would make her own wishes at that fountain. The cycle would continue as it always had, as it always would. Because hope is infinite, love is possible, and sometimes, the best things in life begin with a simple act of faith. That was the truth Grace carried with her, the truth she built her life around. And as she grew old beside Vincent, watching their daughter grow into a remarkable woman, she never stopped being grateful for that day at the fountain. The day everything changed. The day she found her forever. Their story was complete, full and rich and real. Exactly what she'd wished for. Exactly what she deserved. And every single day, Grace woke up beside the man she loved and thought the same thing. Thank you. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for making my wish come true.